Emotion doesn't always arrive with a reason. Sometimes it appears quietly, without a clear cause, without a thought attached to it, and without anything in particular asking for attention. A heaviness in the chest, a subtle irritation, a lift of warmth, a sense of restlessness that doesn't point anywhere. This episode is about what happens when emotion is allowed to exist without being turned into a story. For most of our lives, emotions are treated as information. We're taught, directly or indirectly, that when something arises, it must be saying something, that it's pointing toward a problem, a memory, a need, or a truth we haven't yet uncovered. So when emotion appears, we instinctively turn toward explanation. Why am I feeling this? What does this connect to? What am I supposed to do with it? Sometimes those questions are useful. They help us navigate relationships, understand patterns, or take care of ourselves. But over time, the habit of explanation can become automatic. Every feeling becomes a message that must be decoded, and eventually, that decoding becomes exhausting. There may come a point when that habit begins to loosen. Emotion still arises, but the reflex to explain it softens. You don't immediately reach for meaning. You don't assume it's pointing towards something unresolved. You simply notice that something is present. This can feel unfamiliar at first. Without a story, emotion can feel exposed. There's no framework holding it in place. No narrative saying where it came from or where it's going. It's just there, unaccompanied. But there's also a surprising sense of ease. When emotion isn't required to make sense, it doesn't carry the same weight. It's no longer responsible for explaining your past or predicting your future. It doesn't have to justify itself by linking to memory or identity. It doesn't need to prove that it belongs. It can simply be felt. This is often most noticeable with uncomfortable emotions. Irritation shows up. Instead of immediately locating the cause, you let it be there. Sadness appears. You don't rush to connect it to loss or memory. Anxiety moves through the body. You don't search for the threat. The emotion rises. It shifts. It fades. Not because you managed it, not because you processed it, but because emotions naturally change when they're not being reinforced by interpretation. This doesn't mean emotions disappear quickly. Sometimes they stay longer than expected. But when they're not layered with explanation, they remain simpler, cleaner, less entangled with who you think you are. You're no longer asking what this says about you. And that changes the experience entirely. When emotion isn't turned into a story, it doesn't accumulate. It doesn't build a narrative about your life, your healing, or your progress. It stays local, momentary, specific to now. This doesn't make you indifferent. It makes you present. You still feel. You still respond. You still care. But you don't need to translate every feeling into information. There's often surprise here. Emotions that once felt overwhelming can feel more workable when they're allowed to exist without commentary. They still have sensation. They still move through the body. But they don't take over the whole field of attention. They don't demand continuity. You may also notice that pleasant emotions change in this space. Joy doesn't become something you need to protect or hold on to. Calm doesn't become something you try to maintain. Ease doesn't become a benchmark you measure against. They appear. They pass. And nothing is lost. This episode isn't about emotional neutrality. It's about emotional freedom from narrative. Emotion doesn't need a backstory. It doesn't need a future. It doesn't need to be integrated into who you are. It can simply be experienced. This simplicity can feel unsettling if you're used to understanding yourself through your emotional life. If feelings have been a primary way of orienting, letting them exist without interpretation can feel like losing something. But nothing essential is lost. What falls away is the extra layer, the commentary that turns feeling into identity. You may still speak about emotions when it feels natural. You may still reflect when it's useful. But there's no longer a sense that you must explain what's happening internally in order for it to be legitimate. There's less internal bookkeeping, less tracking of emotional consistency, less concern about whether today aligns with yesterday. You're allowed to feel one thing in one moment and something entirely different in the next, without needing to explain the transition. This can make daily life feel lighter, not because emotions are gone, but because they're no longer carrying the burden of coherence. You don't need to make sense emotionally. You just need to be here. Emotion without a story doesn't mean emotion is ignored. It means it's trusted to move, trusted to change, Trust it to resolve itself without being pushed. And it does. There may still be moments when the mind reaches for explanation. That's okay. That habit doesn't disappear overnight. When it happens, it doesn't need to be corrected. You can notice it the same way you notice emotion. It appears, it moves, it fades. Nothing needs intervention. This season isn't about emotional mastery. It's about emotional permission. Permission for feelings to arise without being recruited into a story about healing, growth, or failure. Permission for emotional life to be inconsistent, unfinished, and unremarkable. You don't need to be emotionally coherent. You don't need to be stable in a narrative sense. You don't need to arrive at clarity. You're allowed to live with emotion as it is. If you're listening to this and you've noticed emotions appearing without explanation lately, you're not becoming disconnected. You're becoming less entangled. Life feels closer when it doesn't have to be explained. If these reflections feel like something you can sit with, you're welcome to stay. Liking the video helps it reach others who may be tired of making sense of every feeling. And if you want to keep a steady space like this as the season unfolds, you can subscribe, not for answers, but for companionship. If someone you care about seems less inclined to explain their emotions lately, you're welcome to share this with them, only if it feels right. Emotion doesn't need a story to be real. It only needs room to move.